Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 148 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Lieberman here with you again this week. And I thought it would be helpful to dive into thought leadership. If you're like many of us as a consultant, you may have included some form of thought leadership in your plan for the next 12 months. And a lot of it, we have good intentions, right? We put down that we want to increase our thought leadership this year to build our reputation. And then business gets in the way, client work gets in the way, and we don't follow through. And I hear from so many consultants, and you might be in the same boat where pretty soon years go by and you haven't implemented the type of thought leadership that you want to have implemented in your business in order to create a better personal brand for yourself, a better business brand for yourself, more recognizable, and ultimately to drive inbound leads. And so I want to help you overcome this thought leadership block on today's episode so that you can get into some consistency and ultimately into a really effective method in your business to build up your reputation for what you do as a consultant and create interest of clients reaching out to you so you don't have to be pounding the pavement looking for those clients. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today, overcoming a thought leadership block so that you can build out a consistent thought leadership routine, whatever consistent means to you. So with that, let's talk about the agenda and then we'll dive into the content. So today's agenda, first of all, I'll just touch briefly on what I mean by thought leadership. It's kind of one of those terms that is thrown out so frequently. I want to make sure we're on the same page about what we're talking about here today. So we'll start off with that. Then we'll talk about why it matters. I'm sure you know why it matters. That's probably why you're listening to this episode, but it's always good to just level set on why this is an important tool in your business for you to leverage in order to generate revenue more easily and more predictably. So we'll touch on why this matters. And then the bulk of the episode, we're going to talk about a couple of examples. So I'll share with you the first example, which is not starting. If you are in that boat where you haven't started really with any, for any intents and purposes, with this thought leadership component to your business. And then we'll talk about the second example, which is you've started, but perhaps you're stuck and just not able to do this consistently. Maybe it's once a year or once a quarter, and you want to get more consistent, but you're just feeling stuck in that zone, which happens to so many of us. We'll go through that example as well. And then we'll pull this all together at the end with a 5-step process for you to leverage in order to get into a consistent, effective, impactful thought leadership routine this coming year. All right. So before we dive in, I want to offer to you a complimentary resource that goes really well hand in hand with today's topic, and that is the Business Growth Assessment. So I think it's around 18 questions, and it walks you through all of the different components of a healthy consulting business and compares what you're doing and how you're operating your business right now to those healthy consulting practice indicators, and then gives you a really solid report on exactly where your growth areas are, where your strengths are, and helps you to prioritize what will move the needle most for you in your business this year if you address it. So you can go find that at icscorecard.com. So the 2 letters IC for independent consultant, scorecard.com. And we'll also put the link to it in the show notes. Go take that. Even if you've taken it before, go take it again and see where you're results may have shifted, it's a great way to start off this year and give yourself a really good baseline. And one of those pillars in that assessment is thought leadership. And that's what we're talking about here today. So let's talk about what is thought leadership. Just briefly, it's fairly straightforward and apparent, but I want to make sure we're on the same page here. Essentially, thought leadership is where you are putting content, putting yourself, making yourself visible as an authority, whether it's speaking or in writing format or in facilitation, even, or being a member of a group. It's where you're putting yourself out there as an authority in your specialized field so that your ideal clients who need that expertise that you've got will seek you out. So, thought leadership examples are things like speaking at conferences, speaking for small groups. Maybe you're going into a company and speaking with their executives about a certain topic that you work on as a consultant to help them understand what's more about that particular topic and how it may be hindering their progress in their organization. There's so many different ways to demonstrate your thought leadership, anything from posting on social media like LinkedIn to writing articles or white papers or facilitating or podcasting or being a member of and participating in a professional group where your ideal clients are accumulated or making even media appearances. So it can be anything from something that feels a lot more straightforward and simplistic, which is posting, an article on LinkedIn, for example, that you're able to control the whole thing, all the way over to media appearances and things where you're a lot more visible and coordinating with other companies or organizations. So it can run the gamut. And when we think about thought leadership, sometimes we make it a lot bigger and more scary than it really needs to be, at least to start with. So when you think about thought leadership, think about what it means to you. What does that term mean? Something we throw around so often. What does that mean to you? And what types of thought leadership are you wanting to pursue for yourself to start with? Answer that question. Don't worry about what's the best method for your business right now, especially if you haven't really started down this path yet. Just think about what might be the easiest thing to get started with so then you can sort of rip that band-aid off, if you will. So, what is thought leadership? We just covered that and now we're on the same page. Let's just touch on why it matters. And I've already hinted at this already, and that's why you're here. But to remind you, it's such a great way to establish your brand if you haven't already, build your brand, build your reputation, stay top of mind with your ideal clients who you've already met or those referral partners, collaborators, other consultants. So ultimately, they seek you out for what it is that you do. So it might be an ideal client seeking you out because they see the thought leadership or they hear the thought leadership that you're sharing. Or it might be that a collaborator or a referrer seeks you out because they know that you're someone that does what they need to refer to. Or it may be that other consultants learn about what you're doing and want to work with you in some capacity as a subcontractor, as an intern, as a referral partner. You putting thought leadership out there and your ability to build a reputation increases the value of your brand, of your company, of the fees you're able to command, and the size of your pipeline ultimately. So that's why this can be such an important component to your business and something that you want to really be thinking about from a continuous improvement perspective. How do you continuously get that leadership into a routine if you're not already? And then ultimately, if you are in a routine, how do you continuously increase the value of what you're offering from a thought leadership perspective so that you're able to drive more of those inbound leads to your business and to your pipeline? That's why it matters. So, as a refresher, Now let's talk about the heart here of this episode. And those are the two examples that I want to share with you. The first one is an example where you haven't really started. Maybe you've published an article or you posted on LinkedIn a few times, but for all intents and purposes, you truly haven't started that thought leadership pillar in your business. And why haven't you? Most people will say I'm either one of two answers is what I usually get. I just keep running out of time. I don't have enough time, or I'm not sure how or where's the best place to start. Those are usually the two primary reasons that I hear from consultants telling me why they haven't started a true thought leadership pillar in their business. But the truth is, it comes down to I'll call it the primary reason of the risk is greater than the reward. The risk is greater than the reward in your mind. So what that looks like is thinking a thought process of I'm going to put this thought leadership out there in whatever form you decide, right? What could be we talked about all the different methods and it's not going to make a difference. So essentially, you're telling yourself it will be a waste of time. So, of course, you're not going to carve out time to work on the thought leadership plan that you put in place because ultimately it feels like a not as good of use of time as something else that's on your list. Also, in terms of risk and reward, it's a concern. Oftentimes, I hear about some form of it will damage my reputation. So, it's riskier to put out thought leadership than what the payback will be in terms of clients in that way. So think about it for you. If you haven't started your thought leadership pillar, that pillar of your consulting business, for all intents and purposes, why not? What is the primary reason? How could the risk be greater than the reward in your mind? And it's important to know that because then that becomes the basis of your solution. The solution is knowing that in your mind, for example, ultimately, if you're honest with yourself, you're worried that it's going to, in the best case, be a waste of time because it won't make a difference. And on the worst case, it could damage your reputation and turn off potential clients rather than pulling them into your pipeline. And those are some examples. You may have others, but really understanding and getting clear with yourself about why is it that you haven't implemented your thought leadership pillar. If you put to the side, I don't have enough time, which is truly just a safe excuse. So now that you've thought about what the primary reason or those couple of true root causes are of why you haven't started that thought leadership pillar, even though you've been telling yourself you need to or want to, then you're able to, based on that root cause, based on that reason that you uncover, build out a solution. And the solution may look like starting small to build confidence or experimenting, thinking about this is just an experiment. I'm going to try this method for a few months and then see what the results are, see if I like it, see if I want to continue, or maybe I'll pivot. Maybe I'll move from speaking over to writing, or maybe I'll end up doing both, but looking at it as more of an experiment. Also, what I find from a solution perspective, when you haven't yet started and that risk feels greater than the reward, is to think about the people and those potential clients and the readers who could benefit from what it is you're sharing and make it more about them and less about you. That always helps so much. Sometimes I get, right, whatever you want to call it, thought leadership block, even on this weekly podcast. What am I going to talk about? I've said everything, all these crazy things come to my mind. And I always turn around to it's not about me, it's about the person listening who truly feels stuck in their consulting business and is worried about succeeding ultimately and concerned they may have to go to back to corporate or worried that they're achieving less than they're capable of. When I start thinking about that, it's so much easier to get started. And that's the same thing for you too. When you make it about someone else and not about you, it can lift that pressure off. You can also say to yourself that you're doing it for the purpose of learning the skill. That's a great way to combat that worry about, well, this is just a waste of time. It's not going to make a difference. You're not in the beginning, when in this case where you haven't really started, you're not necessarily doing it to create, 10 new leads in your pipeline. You've got to start off by doing it for the purpose of learning and getting really good at the skill, and then figuring out, okay, how do I dial this in so that I can get the results that I'm looking for? But that's way down the path here. At the beginning, if you're in this scenario that we're talking about right now, you want to be doing it for the purpose of learning the skill. I want to pull together what I just shared with you by way of an example. So I'll share with you a story of a consultant who was in this boat. She knew that she wanted to get very consistent with thought leadership. She had done things sporadically, maybe once a quarter at best, and really wanted to start up a consistent thought leadership process in her business. And so, as she and I were working together on this goal, we started talking about the issue. Why hadn't she done this already? Why hadn't she implemented a thought leadership process in her business in a consistent way? And so she shared with me that she would start and kind of go down a path and then get worried that she hadn't picked the right method, or that she wasn't writing the best article, or that she would get started with something and then do it inconsistently and it would look bad. It would look worse than if she hadn't done anything at all. And so as we were talking through all of those issues and concerns that she had that were creating this paralysis for her, it became very apparent to both of us that she was overcomplicating this thought process in a big way, overcomplicating this concept of thought leadership. It sounds kind of important, right? Thought leadership. At the end of the day, when you overcomplicate things like this, like she was, of course, you're not going to move forward. When it feels like a big mountain to climb, of course, you're going to go gravitate towards something that's more familiar or easier or you feel better at. And the same thing was for her. She was constantly gravitating toward things that she felt she was more skilled at and felt better to check off her list, quite frankly. And so, as we recognized that she was overcomplicating it, this idea of adding thought leadership into her business, and recognized she was doing that out of fear, she ultimately shared with me that she didn't want to make a fool of herself. Those were her words. I don't want to make a fool of myself and ruin my chances with my client base. So, as you get to the root cause, like we did with this particular consultant, she and I together, then you want to start thinking about then the solution based off of that root cause. Again, it's not about how much time you have or don't have, it's about the root cause, which is in this example, fear of making a fool of herself. And you may have some similar fear. The solution needs to address that root cause. And so, for this example, what she and I did was to really walk her down the path of getting curious about how could we conquer this overcomplication that she was doing? How could we take the fear down a bunch of notches to make it really simple for her to get started in a more consistent way than the sort of, you know, I don't even think it was once a quarter now that I think back to it. It was probably once or twice a year, really. So, thinking about it as we got curious about what is the easiest way to start where we're combating the root causes, which are overcomplicating it due to fear. The questions that I started asking her and she started answering were things like, what's something you want to be known for? Not the one thing you want to be known for, the most perfect thing you want to be known for, or the most compelling thing you want to be known for, or the most differentiated thing you want to be known for. It's none of those. It's just what's something you want to be known for. Again, taking the temperature down, not trying to overcomplicate something or get it right the first time, even. What's something you want to be known for? And she started thinking about that and figuring out what that might be. And then I asked her, what feels like the most comfortable audience or method to you right now? for her, she had read so many different articles and so many different blogs and listened to so many different people about algorithms and how to get on a stage and all of these things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anyone, even me, are telling you. It's about what feels like the most comfortable situation to get started from. So that then on a monthly basis, for example, which was her goal, she could do this on a monthly basis and get these wins under her belt. Again, not worrying about 12 steps down the line and whether this is going to create a pipeline or not to start with. This was more about building up the confidence and doing it for the purpose of helping her ideal clients and referrers. And what is the most comfortable audience and the most comfortable method to get started? Those were some of the questions that I asked her. And it didn't take long. You might think this might require, I need to have a lot of clear time on my calendar to go figure this out and then make a plan. It doesn't require any of that. It requires sitting down and thinking and answering these types of questions and then not talking yourself out of it. For her, she came up with some really quick answers about wanting to meet with startups and their leadership teams, walking them through her methodology and her assessment process from a leadership perspective and building those relationships with those companies and those leaders ahead of time. And then ultimately, those conversations, which was a form of thought leadership, she was most comfortable in those types of settings. So that's why she chose that. And ultimately, those conversations led to work, to a pipeline. And so reminding herself that this was a something she was going to test. It wasn't something she was signing up for the rest of her business life. It wasn't, it was an experiment, and getting herself into that headspace of this is for the purpose of helping others and also to build the skill, and not about if I have five of these type of facilitated conversations, it's going to lead to one to two clients, not jumping down ahead of time when you're just getting started. So if you're in this boat where you haven't yet started, at least for all intents and purposes, you want to really get to the place where you're able to leverage this type of process I just gave you, which is to understand what the root cause is of where your fears lie, and then ultimately create a solution that addresses those and gets you started and rips off the band-aid and allows you to approach it from a place of curiosity and experimentation versus that you need to know what you're doing right now. You need to know from a thought leadership perspective what you're doing, but you don't need to know how to execute on that in the best way until you build up that skill. So that's the first example, not yet even starting. And now the second one is perhaps you're in the situation where you have started, you have published or done some speaking, and it's more sporadic than you want, and you're feeling stuck. You might be writing articles. You might be writing a speaking proposal. You might even be writing a book like I am at the moment, which is a part of the inspiration for this episode. It's easy to get stuck. It's easy to get stuck and think, I don't have nothing else to say, or I'm just repeating things that, have already been said, or this thought leadership that I've implemented isn't really leading anywhere. Those are all very common concerns and ultimately causes of you not having a consistent thought leadership routine. And so then we want to talk about what might be the primary reasons for that to happen to you in your business. It all really comes down to fear of doing a bad job, fear of making things worse than not doing it in the first place. And also, it comes down to judgment. I'll share with you my own story here in a moment about the situation I got into with my book last week. But just resistance and judgment about, well, I shouldn't be in this situation. That creates a block, that creates a situation where you feel stuck. And then it's really hard to write from there, or it's really hard to create a speaking proposal, or it's really hard to go and, write whatever your content is for where you're speaking out when you feel stuck in this way. And so the solution ultimately comes down to the same type of thing that we did with that first example, which is really number one, some emotional management. I'll give you an example of that here in a moment. And then number two, asking and answering some really powerful questions of yourself based on the root cause of why you are stuck. So, here, let me give you my example of where I got stuck last week. So I have a very consistent thought leadership routine, as you are likely aware of, having listened to this podcast and knowing that it's out here on a weekly basis every Thursday. I also publish an email to my email list almost every Friday. And I do a lot of speaking, and I'm also writing this book that I've referenced on the podcast before. If you're new to the podcast, I'm writing a book about how to grow your consulting business. So, anyway, even with all of that strong pillar, that strong thought leadership process in place, I get stuck a lot. And one of the areas that I most recently got stuck on was the book. So, I'm in the editing process right now. And, we're getting close to sending it for proofreading and that kind of thing. But last week, it was a heavy lift working on some really, a lot of edits. And I noticed myself getting stuck on this, on getting it done, on moving forward with the edits, on moving through each chapter, on hitting the deadline that I was given. You may be in the same boat where it's just really hard to not procrastinate, or it really feels like it's almost impossible to pull together your article or your speaking proposal or your book or your content, whatever that it might be. And when you get into that place, the two things that I want to share with you that made all the difference for me and hopefully will make the difference for you too is number one, again, understanding the root cause. The root cause for me of getting stuck and working a lot more slowly and almost feeling as though I couldn't finish, the root cause for me was thinking this main thought, which is, I shouldn't be in this situation right now. I should have been further along. I should be closer to being completed based on the deadline. I should have had more help. Like so many different things going through my mind, which were blocking me from being able to solve the problem, which was I was editing and adjusting the book a lot more slowly than was necessary. And you could call it writer's block in some way, or a thought leadership block, based on what you're working on. So, understanding for me what that root cause was, it wasn't that, I was working on it 10 hours a day. That wasn't the root cause of being stuck or that I was just tired. The root cause was that I was arguing with reality that I shouldn't be in this situation. I shouldn't have put myself in this situation. And also, I was questioning whether I was able, even capable of getting out of it. And so I walked away from my desk, I walked away from my computer, and I asked myself two questions. And I want to give you these questions also. Whether you've got something on your list right now that where you're stuck on it from a thought leadership perspective, or when you encounter this next time you're working on your thought leadership. And these two questions made all the difference, which I finished that whole edit by the deadline. And these were the questions that helped me get past that resistance and past that fear of not finishing and questioning why was I even in this situation and judging myself. The first question was, where have I solved this type of a problem before? I've never written a book before, but I definitely have done, written a lot of other content. I've done a lot of speaking, and you have too, even if it wasn't for your business. You've done speaking and writing when you were in corporate, even if you've never done anything like that for your business yet. Or perhaps you have done it for your business already. Ask yourself the question, where have I solved this before? How have I solved this type of a problem before? For me, the answer came back to what I was sharing with you earlier. When I get stuck in kind of a writer's block or thought leadership block when I'm writing my podcast, I always turn it over to you, to the person that I'm talking to provide value to, and to help you to think outside of the box as it relates to running your business, to get out of your own head and think about things from a more macro perspective. So that's what I did. I started thinking about the ideal reader and who I was writing to, and not about how I got into this situation or if I should be in that situation or not. And the second thing that I asked myself that I want to give to you as a playbook is I asked myself, how could I make this easier? I came up with 3 or 4 solutions to make it easier, to move forward. It's a big book, it's 18 chapters, and it was hard to get it all done in the time frame, that I had. And so the question was not how did I get myself into this situation? The question I shifted to was how can I make this easier? And I was able to finish the edits as a result of those 2 most simple questions. And that's why I want to share them with you today. Whether you're in this situation at the moment, feeling stuck about getting thought leadership out the door, or whether you need to save it for your back pocket for later, those 2 questions make all the difference. Okay, so now that you've got those 2 examples of whether you haven't yet started or for all intents and purposes, a thought leadership pillar in your business, or whether you just are in a more consistent, repeatable process, but you get stuck, whichever of those 2 scenarios you're in, I shared with you today those examples and the process by which you can move forward through them and get this into a great shape for this coming year for your business. Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to share those steps with you to put these into action and recap kind of the framework that I just shared with you as examples. The first part of the framework is really understanding what is your thought leadership goal. So just get clear about that to start with. What is your thought leadership goal? Sometimes we just make it too vague and we don't really know. We just think, I want to be more consistent. Of course, there's no way to measure against, I just want to be more consistent. So get clear with yourself. What is your thought leadership goal for this year from a process perspective? I like to look at it in 2 ways. What is the process goal? So that for you might be, I want to publish an article every 2 weeks, or I want to have 1 speaking engagement per month, something like that. What is the process goal? And then the second component is, what is your outcome goal? So would you like to create from that? So perhaps it's 1 lead a month or something like that. So you've got both the process and the outcome goals defined. That's the first step. What is your thought leadership goal? The second step is to ask yourself, why haven't you either pursued that goal already, or why haven't you achieved that goal already? It might be that you say, well, I just haven't started yet. Okay, great. Ask yourself, why not? Why haven't you started yet? Even if you've only been in business a few months, why haven't you started yet? Ask yourself that question. You'll likely come up with some of the fears that I shared with you that consultants commonly have, or imposter syndrome. Whatever the reason is and why the risk is greater than the reward for in your mind right now, get clear about that so that then you can tackle that real root cause, not the surface level ones. I'm too new to this, or I haven't had enough time. And then after you understand that root cause, which is the third step in the process. So the first step was to get very clear about your goal, both from a outcome perspective and a process perspective. Then understand, why haven't you pursued or achieved that goal already? And then from that question, you're going to get a lot of surface level answers. Haven't had a lot of time, haven't really focused on it yet. But the third step, just to reiterate that, is to dig deeper, figure out beyond those surface level answers, what could the real reason be, such as fear of failure or the risk is greater than the reward in some way. And then the last step of the process is to ask yourself really powerful questions, such as, what would the best audience be to start? Or what's the easiest platform or method to test where your clients are? Or how have you done this before? Or what would make this easiest? And then finally, pull that together into a plan for yourself and start putting it in place so that you move the needle this year on your thought leadership goals. You start building a reputation for yourself so that you're creating more inbound leads. You're creating more conversations with ideal clients and referrers and collaborators and even subcontractors who may support you. ultimately, that's the goal of your thought leadership, to help those ideal clients and those referrers and those collaborators such that they think about you next time they hear someone or they have the problem themselves that you help them to solve. All right. So hopefully these methods will be really powerful for you to make some amazing strides in your thought leadership pillar this year. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.